So we just introduced what we must introduce now. So we don't actually have a name for the podcast yet. Our next episode is going, bonus footage is what we're going to, well, not footage, but audio is going to be where we try and come up with a name. But this is going to be more of a kind of a structured discussion about what is ahead in the next, I don't know, we could say month or 2 months in Irish politics. I think with what has happened in the last 6 to 9 months, I think this is the first time that I think we're seeing some level of structure when it comes to politics. And I think if we look at it, the next week is really going to set a platform for what the next potentially 3 to 4 years of government. I don't think there's any point in looking at it from the next 7 years. We are recording this in the house and it's gravel outside, so that's where you're going to get that real natural sound. So anyways, my name is Alan Brogan. We've got this is a 3-man podcast. We've got Kuhn Burke.
Hello.
And we've got Jonathan Kern.
How are things?
So I think it's best that we really get stuck into it, and first talk about, I think if we talk about the economy, because we've really spoken about the economy and the effects that, first of all, the coronavirus has had on the virus, or has had on the economy, and what it will have looking forward the next 9 to 12 months, and then we also might then have issues with Brexit.
Yeah, I saw what they had a big recovery fund here, so it's available for 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022. So they had 3 different elements. It was infrastructure development, reskilling and retraining, and supporting investment. So like, I mean, they're all kind of buzzwords, to be honest. I don't know if there's too much you can read into it. Like,
well, if
what
you
money
take,
are actually making available? Like,
well, the ECB are putting a lot of credit available, like an unprecedented amount. Like if we take a difference from the start of the recession, so we're talking about 2008 to about 2011, the ECB didn't really put much credit forward because you didn't want to be seen as financing other countries, because that's kind of, it's bordering on illegal. You don't want to be so then, but what an awful lot of parties are saying, and we've heard Eamon Ryan saying that moving forward, I think the approach that we might have to take this time is far more of a kind of an expansionary policy, and that was taken by America. That was their reaction to the recession, while in Ireland and in Europe it was a more of a kind of restrictive nature.
Just austerity.
Yeah, you increase taxation, you cut your losses, and over time you balance the books, and then gradually then you start to reduce taxes. So
what they're saying here is basically more of a broader approach to kind of build up the country again from the graveyard of the...
What it would be, in essence, would be that the simplest way of saying it is an expansionary policy is putting a lot of money available. So that could be in like a wide range of stuff. That could be the €350 a week allowance that we've been seeing.
Yeah.
And what that is, and what that may achieve is, well, what it does achieve is that you go and you spend your money on, let's say, tourism, restaurants, clothes in Ireland, and what you do is then through that then you stimulate the economy and you keep it at a level that it can withstand any sort of economic downturn, and that it will keep employment low.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense just as well, because like, you know, people who can mark history, like the massive recessions like the Depression 28, and then like there was another one in the 20th century, like, you know, there's dot-com bubble burst and all that kind of thing. But now, like, there's been 2 in our lifetime, in our like relatively short lifetime, and not to say there'll be another one. Like, they're becoming a lot more frequent. And I know I saw something, people are worried, you know, it's about like late stage capitalism and these are going to increase and there's more inequality and this kind of thing. But I think definitely this approach, I mean, I don't think people, I think people are pretty, not scared, but people are pretty tired of austerity. You know, that's a bit of a populist word, like, oh, we're tired of austerity. But I think, like, you know, it is interesting that they're taking this approach at the highest level. ECB are saying no, we need to change tax. So
I suppose in a sense you kind of have to just carry on regardless. If it is kind of getting more common that there's going to be up and downs in the economy, you still have to get your infrastructure work done. You still have to get your, you know, the things you want to do completed.
You have to increase the base. Yeah, you have to make the base of a country as power as kind of as powerful as possible in a way. Like, you know, if you take Ireland, that, you know, we are educated quite well, which is an incentive for multinational companies to come to the country. So education plays a huge role. You know, if your labour force isn't educated, you aren't able to get the top jobs. Like, if you take like the pharmaceutical industry, an awful lot of pharmaceutical companies have come to Ireland for a good few reasons, but the main two would be the quality of the workforce and for the taxation.
Yeah, the old lovely corporation
Yeah,
tax rate.
the 12.5% apparently.
They're keeping that in the new program for government. They'd say that they're committed to that rate.
Yeah.
Like, we are undercutting the EU, really.
Yeah, with the EU I'm not impressed.
Yeah.
Like, the OECD, I think, have a global. They're proposing a global minimum corporation tax rate, and we're kind of like, oh yeah, that's great, but at the same time, basically being a tax haven. So
it's interesting. I read an article today, and the point of the article was that lower corporation tax. The argument was that lower corporation tax actually isn't a massive like driver to bring multinationals into a country. And I didn't read into it, but it just struck me from just kind of glancing over it. I couldn't tell, was he saying this because being like, that means we should raise the corporation tax rate because it's not an excuse to keep it low, or was he saying, well, that just proves that like this isn't, you know, we should keep it low because like it doesn't even matter. It was really hard to see what the point of his argument was. I feel we're really kind of the black sheep in the EU by keeping it this low.
Yeah, like for countries, like attracting multinational companies, it's really a competition. It's who can really attract them the best, you know. And I think Germans aren't really happy with it. The Americans certainly weren't, but their rate prior to Trump was in the 30s.
Yeah.
And they've, I think, decreased it. They've certainly decreased it. I'm not entirely sure at what amount. Could be 16.6% or something like that, which was a huge drop, you know. But I think, of course, the 12.5% has been seen to not be the true rate. In the case of Apple, we've seen that it can be easily taken down to 1 or 2%, which is
different thing altogether.
Yeah, you know, but you then have to look at it from a broader perspective. You know, what are the knock-on effects from that? You know, are like, if you take Dublin for instance, if you take the Grand Canal, you know, like Facebook, Morgan Sachs, or
Microsoft,
or is Morgan Stanley, sorry. Google, eBay, they're all here and they're all employing and they're all creating economic growth. It's the question is, if you raise it up to that 16%, what will be the difference?
But now I could be wrong here, but I don't know how many actual jobs are provided by the big tech companies in Ireland. Like, sure, there's data centres, there's, you know, different sort of things.
The secondary economy around all those workers, like the coffee shop
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. It is hard. It's very hard to quantify though.
Yeah.
And maybe because it's such an unknown, that's what makes it so powerful, because you don't know. And that's people say, well, you don't want to get rid of that because like God knows many people lose their jobs, and that's nearly more powerful than being like this many people rely on this few corporations or whatever.
Yeah, better keep Ireland in the East Caribbean, I suppose.
But when we look at, you know, when we're talking about kind of like the big big multinational companies and the smaller companies, we kind of get into a question of what this deal. Well, we're in essence talking about the deal that that the governments are going to vote on. We see that predictions are that Fine Gael for certain are going to vote in favour of it. More than likely Fianna Fáil will. It's the question whether the Green Party will. They require a 2/3 majority to pass it. I saw in the Irish Times Mark Ruffalo was called in.
Yeah.
That's a last ditch attempt.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely sure.
It's pathetic, I think.
It's not. It's a bit of a. Yeah.
It's not going to. I don't think it's going to get anyone on side. But look.
Yeah, I think an interesting way to look at where the Greens are coming from to kind of understand it a bit was, it just hit me. Because I knew that there was, like I said, Fine Gael I think are pretty much going to vote yes.
Yeah.
Fianna Fáil, there's a lot of councillors and stuff that's going to say no. They want to say no. I wasn't sure why, so I kind of looked into, you know, the sort of some of the figureheads were saying no, don't really listen to their interviews, saying why they don't want to go into government, and it seemed to kind of come down to not a policy thing, more a politics thing. There was mention of that they didn't want to lose their identity as a political party, because they think that even since the supply and demand agreement they had with Fine Gael, that their sort of identity as like a separate political entity from Fine Gael has definitely been sort of merged. Like, people always jokingly like sort of call them as one thing, and you know, it might be a joke, but I think that definitely affects them as a party, and they think now going into government with them, people will just view them as the one thing, and then next maybe in the future that will really damage them, which definitely would. You know, you want your party to have a strong identity. And then there was other mention of the interesting one of them mentioned quality of life, which is funny because it's like the title opening of this whole thing is quality of life. So that's what we're doing, and housing and rural life. Housing, I think everyone can agree, no matter what political affiliation you are, that the housing is a huge, you know, bad point by the last few governments. And rural life as well, which you can probably read as farmers. I mean, they're not going to come off. Well, not that they're going to not come off well, I think that's a lie, but they're going to have to make big changes to line up with the carbon emissions.
Well, at the moment it's incompatible, like, you know,
yeah.
you're not going to be a farmer and be an avid supporter of the Green Party, really.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're going to have to cull your herd, potentially.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or
you're
diversify your...
Yeah, you're going to have to change with the times, I think, you know, and it's the same as every company now. Like, if you take restaurants, for instance, that prior to the virus were operating as normal, everything was perfect, that they could fill the restaurant as kind of nearly tightly as they wanted to within reason. And now most, like, if you take the high-end restaurants, they now have to offer takeaways, something that they would have shunned years ago, because it would, like, the thought of putting a Michelin star quality piece of food into a plastic container and then given it to a delivery guy, you know what I mean, but you have to change or else you'll die as a company. And I think in the agricultural sector as well, you're going to have to think about this as a long-term issue. And I think that's especially with climate change, and I think with everything, you have to look at it from a long-term perspective, not a 5-year plan, like a 25-year plan.
But even in the short term, like, Irish farmers are being bought out by, or they're being undercut by Argentina and South America. So,
and it's no, like, if you were a farmer, it's no wonder if a local Fianna Fáil councillor came in to you with like, my button issue is I'm protecting your rights, I'm going to make sure you stay in a job. Like, of course, they're under threat and they know it. You know,
it's sweet music to their ears.
Yeah, but I think in a way Ireland is very lucky. We don't really have a whole kind of post-industrial. Like, we didn't really have a whole lot of heavy industry in this country, bar, you know, Harland Wolff, even, you know, that's Northern Ireland. They're probably very little heavy industry, which means we don't have, like you see in the Rust Belt in America, Northern England, Northern France, these sort of, and South Germany as well. These sort of like big groups of predominantly men who were usually employed in heavy industry. That's now gone. There's no chance of coming back, and it's like, what do you do? How do you keep these people employed? How do you keep quality of life high? But the opposite is we have huge rural farming community, and that's sort of these are the people who are most vulnerable, I think, to climate change. But I think it's good because these people who've lived on land, they care about the land, and that's been their job for their whole lives, to look after the land. So yes, they're going to have to change, but I think that they realise that maybe they'll have to change, maybe they're a dairy farm, maybe they won't be able to do dairy farming anymore, but they won't be able to do dairy farming anymore.
But I think generationally they are changing anyway. Like, you know, we live in Carlow, it's a very rural county, like there's a lot of farmers. You know, farmers' sons and daughters are going to college anyway. They're doing different things.
That's very true.
Not as many of them are just inheriting the farm, or it's nearly like a hot puck or a hot potato sometimes. Like, people don't want it.
Well, the days of, or the amount of farmers in Ireland who are purely farmers is reducing, because the profit to be made from farming has reduced significantly, because there's a couple of reasons. The competition, especially from abroad, has increased hugely, and that has driven down the price an awful lot, you know, and also the price of land has increased, you know, to an unsustainable level. If you bought land in 1950s, you in maybe 10 or 15 years possibly could have paid that off. Now if you want to buy a decent farm, let's say for instance it costs 100 acres at €10,000 an acre, that's $1 million. Farmers barely break even So how can you possibly...
Off a million.
Yeah, so if you take... Now on the flip side, in the UK, the farming is done completely different, where you lease the land. There's a guy who owns a vast quantity of land, and you lease maybe 100 acres from him, and you operate like that. There's a different way of operating. It's neither right or wrong, it's just different. But I think I think if we are to support agriculture, in like on the flip side, like they are going to suffer if we are going to look at reducing carbon. What we are going to have to do is, as a society, we're going to have to change our eating habits.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think the days of we're going to have to eat healthier, and we're going to have to think about what we buy, and buy local, buy organic food. Think about the stuff that we buy rather than focusing towards stuff that's cheap, that's packaged in plastic, which obviously brings us to a separate issue. But we have to think far more, because I think we've really kind of aligned ourselves with the UK in an instance where we were so focused on what's cheap and what's fast, convenient food.
Yeah.
Instead of fast food, it's convenient food.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the truth. Like, farmers are going to have to adapt, we're going to have to adapt, they're all going to have to happen. I suppose it's just a worry that farmers don't want to change that drastically, and it's a worry then if Fianna Fáil are telling them, hey, you don't, it's going to be okay, because
The likes of the Healy Rays whispering sweet nothing into the ear as they vote for them again.
that's a real worry, because
but they're stubborn, they're ingrained in their ways.
I mean, that's their way of life, and it's very, you can't go telling someone it's wrong now, you have to change.
You have to completely change
fair,
their life.
But it's a process. But I think it's probably very easy for them to say, look, it's going to be okay. We're going to make sure it doesn't happen.
But like even me, I'm aware of the issue that I need to, say I want to cut down on meat. Say I'm aware that I should do that for the good of our world or whatever.
But it's hard.
And still, it's hard.
Absolutely, it's an abstract thing.
It's not necessarily that you cut down on meat, but it's that maybe the meat that you buy, you'd be more wise on where you buy your meats. And that you would buy it from places perhaps like that would be more that would have maybe a more favourable cut to the farmer.
Yeah, but that to me would mean that I'm paying more, so I'd buy less. If I was buying all my meals, now I'm living at home because of the pandemic. But if I was buying all my meals, I would not be eating half as much meat as I do today.
Yeah,
that's true. I suppose then I kind of segues into. We've kind of said the Fianna Fáil say no because of an identity issue. The Greens say no, more of an ideological issue. Well, some of the Greens are saying no because it's kind of an ideology thing. They're saying that this is the Greens went into government in, was it 2003? Is that correct?
Could be right.
2006.
Was it 2006?
Because I think the PDs were in 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they were in. They were into from 2006 to 2011 maybe.
Yeah, we should probably just check that and then
because
all out so we can come back and be like, the Greens are in 2004 when you say it, definitely. So sounds like we know what we're talking about.
I can keep going in.
But I think
make a note of the time as well, so when you're editing, actually, it makes it easy for you.
20 minute mark.
So do we know what year it was?
1 sec. They were in from 2007 to 2011.
2007, yeah. So the Greens are in 2007. That party was 100% more right leaning. Not to say it was right wing, definitely more right leaning than the one now, than the current Green Party. And there's definitely a bit of a gap between the older members, people who were maybe elected in 2007, and the younger people, the people like Saoirse McHugh, Tate Donnelly, Sean McCabe, those kind of guys now. And that's what everyone know, because they're saying yes. I think anyone who reads this, especially if you weren't from the Green Party, they would dwell a lot. Like literally every second line, there seems to be some reference to climate change, reducing emissions, which is great. But for people who that's really their issue, I describe it a greening of status quo, as opposed to like the real, maybe some of the maybe larger changes that need to be made.
Yeah. One thing I have an issue with, and this has nothing to do with anything, is that they called it in the kind of manifesto or whatever the program, Green New Deal, which is the same as Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez had in the US. I just think it's pathetic how much we follow. Like,
I know. But that's what the EU are calling theirs as well, a Green New
Think
Deal.
of your
So-
own name.
I know.
Green New Deal.
And it's not even
a good
it's not
name.
even a Green New Deal. It's it's a green, and a lot of the things that have it were stuff that they've already implemented or are planned to implement. It's a lot of sort of just after time,
Well, that's what I think in Ireland, like,
Yeah.
there's fairly good consensus anyway that this stuff should have happened. So it's nearly a straw man. Oh yeah, we'll give you all this. We
Absolutely.
won't do it anyway.
Absolutely, yes.
So
I think you're right there.
I think from the Green Party point of view, I think they're extremely scared that in 2011 they were pretty much on the brink of extinction.
Yeah.
I think Eamon Ryan was the only guy to get re-voted in, or was he?
I think he
I think he was the only guy to get re-elected in the 2011 election. You can look it up.
Fact check that.
But the party was near extinction. The same happened to the Labour Party in 2016. Before the 2011 election, the Labour Party were the most popular party, and but that was I think that was a year, but that was to 9 months before the election, and then they ended up being a minority with Fine Gael. But then in 2016, then they got wiped out as well. So there is a kind of a trend that all the minorities get. So from the Green Party point of view, they're like, well, we're only starting to rise now. Why should we potentially stump a potential Sinn Féin-esque growth?
Yeah.
Because that's what you have to look. They look towards that. They're like, if the Green Party could potentially grab another 5 to 10 seats, which I think is, they don't have enough members, and I think
it's a small party.
Yeah, I also thought that the Green parties in the last election did extremely well. There was a couple of guys that I did not think was going to get it. Malcolm Brown, for instance, and Carol Kilkenny. I was I was extremely surprised that he got in.
Yeah, and by the skin of his teeth over a pretty strong Fianna Fáil candidate.
And Bobby Aylward, who had been in, I think, it was his first term.
Yeah.
But he was a stalwart, really.
I don't think he'd get in again. If they were to have another election, I don't think he would.
I think if they ever have another election right away, they wouldn't. I think one of the main reasons that he might get re-elected in the future would be he was one of the main pushers for the regional towns scheme, which gets a lot of talk in this program about the whole thing about basically building up regional towns, making sure that local towns and local economies are self-supporting and they're not just become like leeching off bigger cities. There's a lot of important things there, stuff about new public buildings for towns need to be built in that town. They can't, because at the moment a lot of them are being built further away, so they're having offices up in Dublin. This kind of thing, they're like, no, if you're building a public building for a town, you build it in that town, and that's important things. He was a big pioneer of that. So I think if that was going to become success next year, he definitely sees that grow. But I agree, I think if there's an election now, people like him, people might say, well, we gave the Greens a chance.
It also depends hugely on how the media are going to portray the fallout of this. If it fails, what are the media going to decide? Because the media, in fairness, let's be honest, do play a huge role in like all walks of life. But I think if you look at if the Green parties are the only ones to reject this deal, and if we do end up going into another general election, you will see, I believe, Sinn Féin, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil pretty much go at the Green parties for
just have them as the scapegoat.
As the scapegoat, I believe. Because I think from the Sinn Féin point of view, if they can possibly get more candidates together, I think they might possibly get more. Fine Gael, to be honest, if we have to look at the reaction of the virus, they haven't done much wrong, even though for the most part they've just been spokespeople. If you look at how the media has reacted to our response compared to the response in the UK, completely different. So that is going to help Fine Gael, especially. Fianna Fáil, maybe the losers in that, but it's hard to know.
Recent polls have showed a massive bounce back for Fine Gael. Fine Gael leading in votes, I think, between ages 25 and 45 and 60. I think Fine Gael are now back to leading. Sinn Féin will have the younger vote, I think Fianna Fáil will have the older vote. But huge resurgence for Fine Gael because they did handle it well with a lot of people, and it was reassuring, especially when you're looking at Donald Trump on one side, Boris Johnson on the other, Celia Varadkar be strong and be like, we're closing it down, we're doing this, we're doing that. So definitely I think they're in a strong position right now.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 would have actually made people nearly like Simon Harris.
Yeah,
Nearly.
which is
unprecedented.
I mean,
let's be honest.
I was talking about it with someone, and I think apparently Simon Coveney said in an interview he mentioned the new Minister of Health, who let's say Simon Harris wasn't going to be the Minister of Health. And someone went, geez, yeah, get him out, which they followed up with, he's poor lad must be under so much stress, he needs a break, you know. I've never heard anyone say
His
that
hair
about
literally
politics before.
changed colour.
Literally, yeah, he aged.
In front
yeah.
of her eyes,
yeah,
you could see it.
So.
But if we look then towards, well, I think what we actually have to look towards is housing. I think what is prior to COVID, and I think was, if we look at the what was the main topic of conversation when it comes to the general election, I think we talk in general election about the economy, health, and then we talk about, so from a social aspect we talk about social housing and housing in Dublin. Sinn Féin saw huge results, or huge meteoric rise, you could say, in the last general election, and that was it was kind of seen as people wanted a change, this kind of the status quo of politics, and what people, I think, maybe are sick and tired of the same party politics where you say a lot but not a lot is achieved. I think you're seeing that across Europe, you're seeing that across the world. You kind of did see that in America. You know, it was a Trump, which would have been seen as somebody completely different, kind of a complete outsider, and then you would see Hillary Clinton, who was the kind of polished politician, and I think people are sick of that, and I think you're seeing a small bit of that here, not obviously as extreme, but
to a degree, definitely. I think even just on your point of housing though, Sinn Féin have one massive advantage when it comes to housing policy, which is Owen Bryn, because he literally went out and wrote the book on social housing, and he's massive respect. I think he's earned massive respect amongst like architects and engineers and builders and stuff, and I think the only person who wouldn't want to see him be Minister of Housing is maybe like Johnny Ronan, you know. These kind of guys, like, he really has proven himself. I think regardless of your politics, you'd have to say he would be an excellent housing minister. He seems to really, really know his stuff, and he was definitely a massive reason they got so many votes in the end, I think.
Yeah, I think, would you reckon if they had now another election this year, this government talks, they break down, and we had another election, do you think they'd do well?
It's hard to know. They'd probably spin it that we've given Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Greens a chance. They had 168 days to do it or whatever. They haven't done anything, whatever. The housing crisis is still a problem. Health is still a problem.
Yeah, I think it'd be a close race. I think people, like as we were talking about, they're really back Fine Gael, how they handle the crisis was very well.
Absolutely.
yeah, I think
Fianna Fáil could lose that massively.
yeah, Fine Gael, I think, would probably eat up a certain section of Sinn Féin seats.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I think
so.
perhaps amongst the young voters, because we saw that hugely in the demographics of the breakdown of the voting, was that from the 20s to the 40s, Sinn Féin pretty much dominated the election, and it was kind of from 40 to 80. That's where you saw the Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil pick up a lot of seats. Now, is that a kind of an eye? Is that potentially an eye towards in 10 years' time? Will we see possibly Sinn Féin have a majority government? We don't know. We can't read that much forward, because if you were to say 15 years ago that Sinn Féin were going to be in the position they are, and that
if you said it 2 years ago, I don't know what to believe you.
You know, like, I think for Sinn Féin it's been an extremely difficult time. They've been their own worst enemy an awful lot, I believe, because they have had to battle their own past. And I think the media has come out strong against them.
Rightly so, like, you know,
they have made they have made a lot of problems, and I think Mary Lou has polished herself quite a bit, I think, from where she was years ago.
I think people have massive respect for Mary Lou after the last election, generally, I think.
She's their strength, I would say.
Yeah, I think people who would have never voted for Sinn Féin even a few years ago are now looking at different, and a large part of that is due to Mary Lou. She's proven to be very strong.
I think when Jerry left, I think there was that may have been kind of the closing of that kind of the 70s, 60s, what people thought of Sinn Féin.
Yeah, he was a big problem with them. Like, it was hard to get past.
Yeah, he did have a cult following, but I think if Sinn Féin are to move on, or are to be seen, you know, the Owen O'Briens are kind of going to be seen as the future of the party. I think that you kind of have to move forward and be kind of respected as a political party, and not maybe, as some would see it, possibly as a kind of a political rebel group
terrorist
or an
organisation.
active,
Some people's
yeah,
eyes.
an activist group.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, to be seen on, like, say, Owen Wins on his own merit, like, and not to be, you know, not to be taken away from because of the past of Sinn Féin. Like, you know, he's his own, like, he had nothing to do with the Troubles or
No, exactly.
No.
Yeah.
like, you know.
Yeah. And
So-
he was by all accounts an excellent politician, and
Mm.
so was Mary Lou. And you know, people think Pierce Doherty as well. People have a lot of belief in Pierce Doherty as he would be a good finance minister. So yeah, they have a lot of, and look, I'm sure it shows they're on near the highest amount of vote spending party in the country. So
Yeah.
Now, if we look towards Owen O'Brien's policies, and now if we take that as kind of one aspect, and if we look at housing, and we talk about, first of all we'll talk about Dublin, and then we'll lead into the issue of social housing. We look at how do you solve the housing crisis. Any thoughts?
one interesting development the last government implemented, that won't show fruit for a while, but I think is an interesting step, is the Land Development Agency, which is basically set up to manage the state's land and build houses essentially on it. It was brought in by very unsuccessful and unpopular Housing Minister Owen Murphy, but I think it's an interesting step to sort of be like, we have this land, let's use it. And the website is interesting. You can go on and see what projects they have planned, like what stage they're at. It also has a map of all the land that the state owns, which makes for really interesting reading. For example, like in Dublin, there's like the major sites people kind of know, like in Carlow, for example, there's very very little land here. But in some places in Waterford City, an incredible amount of land is owned by the city and by the government, which is really interesting. There's a huge possibility there. And another really interesting point in that is, coming from an architect's point of view, Owen Murphy made some really worrying comments at the end of his tenure, where he basically said, we're going to basically make building houses as quick as possible. He's like, we're just going to go straight to the builder and build those houses. He didn't say that, he more, parliamentary language, but that's not really, if you want to build good houses that are going to last and people are going to live in and it's going to make this country better, you got to put some thought into them. And the Land Development Agency have linked up with the RIAI, which is the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and they've got architects involved from the word go, and they're building what looks like, they do design reports and all their plans. It looks like that could be a really, really positive step. But I know on the other side there's some talk in Greens that the Land Development Agency is basically just subsidising developers, and it's, at the end of the day, these projects are going to go to developers, and as opposed to actually building social housing, state funded housing for people. So there's a bit of
I do know that a portion, I'm not sure what percentage of any new housing in Dublin now has to be social housing. I think it's 30% or something.
I think it's something like 20 or 30.
something
Yeah,
like that.
it was. And makes sense. Some would disagree with that hugely, but I think
What could I do? That's done. When Conor talks about Gobber.
oh yeah, is that him?
Yeah.
I don't know, we're all staring out the window.
You'd be listening to the podcast now.
Just the variety of noises we're getting here.
But I think
You wouldn't hear it from one day to the next. And then you record the podcast, they're all out.
The soul is grand.
But if you were like, how long do you think it would realistically take to get all those plans in motion? Like, there are going to be people that are going to be, like in any sort of project like this, there's going to be people that are going to win and there's going to be people that are going to lose. But how long do you think it will take before we actually see some light at the end of the tunnel?
I suppose it is hard to advocate for sort of thoughtful construction and thinking about things and being like, do we actually need to build here, or can we just retrofit the building that's already here? These sort of design questions to do with our built environment, which are important when there's thousands of people homeless. You just want to get people into homes, so it's hard to say. and also there's also anything to do with land in Ireland is an issue. And another huge issue in Ireland is, is the constitution basically enforces the right to private property to like an extreme degree, and it makes it extremely difficult for the government to CPO anyone. And it's mentioned in the programme for government that they would give the Land Development Agency more policy purchase order power and the ability to buy private land, which would probably necessitate a referendum, which they've mentioned. They said that there would more than likely, they just said a referendum on housing, whatever that may be, more than likely something to do with the compulsory purchase order. But there's the other couple issues there, it could be. So, I mean, there's major stumbling blocks in the way. It won't be a quick fix, and it probably shouldn't be, because it may turn out, I mean, I think if you want a sustainable long-term solution, it's going to take a while.
And the problem is, like, if we take, how long has Owen Murphy been housing minister? He's
4 years, 3 years?
4 or 3 years, possibly, yeah. You know, we have spoken about him not doing anything, while potentially he may have been, but the problem is you can't build a house overnight.
Yeah.
You know, you have to put those in. You have to put the foundation, like literally put the foundation to create a solid block that you can work off, rather than, you know, Owen Murphy could announce, oh well, look, this year we have built 100,000 houses. Well, now technically they are prefabs and they are on the side of the M50, but technically are houses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
as opposed to being, we built 5,000 houses, but they're well designed, they're A1 rated, like people living there are really good comfort. Like you say, that's a different thing.
But I think everyone's immune to like whatever housing minister is, you know, instantiated at the time, saying we've built X amount of houses. Like literally every single year, it's like, oh, we plan to build this many houses, like another 75,000 or whatever the fuck. Like, it just.
Yeah, like
people don't care. Like I honestly, I listen to it, it goes straight through my head. Like
it
doesn't mean anything.
It's hard to put meaning behind those figures sometimes. Yeah.
Like it is extremely difficult, because we have to think about how the housing crisis came about. We had the recession in 2008, which pretty much brought the property industry to an abrupt end. A lot of developers went out of business. And we went from building, I think, possibly 100,000 houses a year, 94,000 a year, to pretty much zero. But then we went from a huge level of urbanisation, because all the jobs began to circle around Dublin. Yeah. Like, the recession is still felt outside of Dublin. We have to admit that is the case. And that is what's is really being aimed at in the deal here, is focusing on quality of life. Let's aim it at the regional. Let's improve town centres, and by doing that, you may actually solve your other issues. You may solve your housing issue, because you may draw investment out of the city and out to the periphery.
Do you know what was interesting? I was in Bunclody today. We were driving through. I've never seen it as busy in my life. Well. Yeah. Maybe in my life, but like after the recession, it was dead. There was nothing in Bunclody.
No.
You know, nice place. Like.
Lovely. Yeah.
There was literally hopping.
Listeners are from Bunclody. That's a fantastic place. I want to sponsor us.
But yeah, it was hopping. I was kind of surprised. Like, you know, you don't see that very often.
Rural town has been really busy.
Yeah, actually busy.
Yeah. Well, there could be two. Like, if we are looking at ways that you can solve the housing crisis, I think we are seeing, obviously, of course, people are having to work from home.
Yeah.
And that could be one of the reasons why Bunclody is so busy, is because people are working from home now. And instead of travelling up to Dublin every day, they're working from their own house. So that could be, you know, we saw Airbnb market in Dublin pretty much collapse, and we saw a huge influx in supply in Dublin. Now, is the answer to that to ban Airbnb in Ireland? It would have a knock-on effect, perhaps, like especially in touristy areas, Kerry, Galway, such. But do you ban it in just Dublin?
You can ban it in the inner city, maybe.
Yeah, between the canals.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, it's definitely the problem with housing in Dublin, I think, as well as Airbnb, is just fake properties. You know, it's the whole thing about living above the shop, which has died out kind of in Ireland. Like, you know, people run a shop above it, but in Dublin, it's not a thing at all. And there's huge swathes of Dublin that have deathly low occupancy rates because there's shops on the ground floor. The ground above that is storage. Maybe there's a couple of apartments above that. Maybe they're empty.
Yeah.
And there's no incentive to people who own those big properties to refer to it. They don't have the money to own. Maybe they inherited this huge property. They don't have hundreds of thousands to renovate it. They just own the property. It's worth a lot of money. And they're just kind of sitting on it because it's making them money at the moment. You know, that's a huge issue. And retrofitting those houses and making them suited for human habitation is a massive issue that probably needs stronger compulsory purchase orders from the government and stuff. It's a bit of a trick one.
Well, they gave it some lip service in the programme here. I have a quote. They say, bring forward an expanded town and village renewal scheme to bring vacant and derelict buildings back into use and promote residential occupancy. So, I mean, they're giving it some...
Yeah,
they're making no promises really, but they're recognising it.
Regulation or adjusting regulation to aid housing supply would be a short-term fix to kind of bridge the gap between the long-term fix, which is increasing supply. But the private market has to see an incentive to build as well, because you know the government itself can't build 100,000 houses. It doesn't have the, you know, after this virus, this deal is very good, sounds very good, and it's extremely similar to manifestos that we saw before the election. How many of those will actually be put into effect is extremely hard to know, because you know money is an issue.
Speaking of money in housing, one thing I thought was interesting is the whole retrofitting thing, which is seen as like a real opportunity for like Ireland is some of the coldest houses in Europe, some of the worst living conditions in terms of, you know, just quality and quality of build, heat and stuff. So retrofitting is super important. It's also massively pretty important for the environment, and also create lots of good jobs, new apprenticeship schemes, we keep builders busy, whatever, loads of things. But the thing about retrofitting is you can't really do it in stages. Like people talk about heat pumps. Heat pumps are useless unless you have a really well insulated house. So it has to all be kind of done at once. The government wants to retrofit 500,000 homes by 2030. So say if they start, say if they start in 2021, January 1st, 21, they have 9 years to retrofit 500,000 homes. It's about 55,000 a year, which works out about 150 a day. Talk to people in the inner city, they reckon not a fear is that going to happen unless there's a dramatic change. At the way we're going now, there's no way is that going to happen, and that's only a quarter of the housing stock in Ireland. It's about 2 million houses in Ireland as of 2016. Houses built after that would be built to a higher standard. So it's only a quarter, and it's massively ambitious. And also the cost. The cost of retrofitting a house can be 35, 75 more thousand. It's going off billions. And also economies of scale, things like that, the government could definitely do it for cheaper, but it's still a huge, massively ambitious program that still only reaches a quarter of our housing stock.
Are they providing grants, or are they doing a full?
Well, at the moment they apply a grant, you have to pay it all up front, and then you do like an air tightness test, and if you fail, you don't get any money, and if you pass, you get half the money back. So 50% grant is good, but it means you still got to pay 30, 40, 50,000 up front, which most people can't do.
Just buy a blanket.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah.
Not actually having to buy a blanket. But
you live in Dublin in the coldest house there is.
It's absolutely frigid.
But then on the flip side, there's also massive opportunity. Like I said, like one thing like insulation. Most insulation we use now is expanded polystyrene, plastic, not good for the environment. A good environmentally sound option would be cellulose, which is basically recycled newspapers, or sheep's wool. Currently, farmers don't get any money for their sheep. The price of the wool barely covers the cost of shearing the sheep. What if there was a whole economy built around using that sheep wool to make insulation? Like that's an opportunity. Helps farmers out as well. You know, there is things like that could definitely be of help and circular economy and what's it, but it's still a massive issue.
It's kind of like, why isn't that happening? You know, like if it's a good idea, which it sounds like it is, like there has, I don't know, maybe there's a reason why it's not happening.
It's the upfront costs.
Yeah, I don't think. What are you speaking especially about the sheep's installation or the whole thing?
Say it's sheep's installation.
I think it's at the moment it is more expensive than expensive polystyrene. Everyone who's retrofitting their house at the moment is doing it privately by themselves. They're going to take the most cost-effective route, or they might just tell the builder. The builder knows what to do, and you do. If the builder's using the expanded polystyrene, he's getting from Kingspan. It's easier. It's more trusted. It's just what we've always done. But that doesn't mean there's no reason why we can't change.
Yeah,
that's just because it's how we've always done. But I don't think there's any barrier.
Also, I think people aren't informed on the different methods. They ask the builder what they want to do, and he gives them that one option, when they don't actually know that there actually are 3 or 4 different options that you can use. So I think it's
up to the governments to be
I think
this is a better option. Tell the builders. So then if you're a homeowner, you say the builder do what you think's best, and he does what's best for them and for the environment and for the country.
perhaps a grant within the grant, that you tailor the grant to a certain way. That if you choose, let's say, a more kind of more environmentally friendly option, which will be laid out, that you get 75% of the grant. If you use the other way, you get 50% of the grant. So then what you leave the option that you have in front of the consumer is that cost is no longer the issue. It's just a moral choice.
Yeah.
And the way it used, like, if you think about anything in society at the minute, the more environmentally friendly option is more expensive.
But it's funny that usually that's because it's a new thing. Like solar panels are now are the cheapest form of electricity generation in the world, and people had predicted that this would happen eventually there, but the prediction has been blown out of the water by how quickly it's happened. And it's like anything, if there's mass adoption of anything, capitalism will see to it that it will become extremely cheap.
Yeah.
Well, if there is a demand there for it, people will start making it, and then with the supplier going up, the price of it will go down. It's just natural enough.
Yeah. It's the wonders of capitalism here.
I think.
Yeah, one other small thing that is procurement. Really difficult for small to medium enterprises to get government contracts, especially in developing houses, building, architects. It's a huge issue at the moment, but it looks like that's changing. That's in the programme for government. The fact that the Land Development Agency have used the RIAI, which in themselves have contracted small to medium architects to do this kind of thing, is a good sign. But it's just worth noting because that is a bit of an issue at the moment.
Yeah. Like, I think, and it probably brings us to the segue. Well, we could talk about this perhaps last, but we can talk about it now. Do we think the deal will be passed? Because we can talk about this deal all we want.
Do we think the deal will be passed, or do we think they should pass the deal? Should we
you can answer both within your answer.
If I was in the Green Party now, if I'd vote, I would vote to pass the deal, because I think if you don't, we always hear about how urgent climate action is, and even if it isn't the best deal that we have, and I know there's issues politically with housing and all the rest of it, but I feel like they're not going to get a stronger mandate than they have now. I think this is the best chance to push some things through that they wouldn't otherwise get.
And do you believe within a 3-party government that they can achieve what they want? This is unprecedented. We've never had 3 parties together. I think they said that maybe 1948 or 28 was the last time that there's been a 3-party government. Now, multiple party governments beyond 2 is extremely popular in the likes of Netherlands. And I think they see up to 5, but here it's unprecedented. So to have 3.
I don't know. And obviously the minority in that 3-party government. So it's hard to know, but I just think that they have snuck a couple of things under the door. They have the power now to make or break a government. That might not be the case if they have another general election. So then they could be just out in the wings, watching Fianna Fáil roll back all their lovely policies, and then where are we? Another 5 years down the line? Who knows?
I suppose the counter to that is that yes, there's an excellent opportunity for them to put forward all their ideas. Like the 7% CO2 emissions every year is definitely a huge win for the Greens. That's a tough environmental marker they're giving themselves, and they got to do that's huge. But it's not enough, realistically. This program is definitely green orientated, but it's not enough. And I suppose the argument is the next 6 months are crucial for how the world tackles climate change. And by accepting this, 70-60% deal, you're committing to that when you know that it's not enough. Or really say, no, we're not going to have to, we're not enough. Step back, maybe it's a general election. I think if they get in with Sinn Féin, if the Greens would get in with Sinn Féin, I think they would have a chance of maybe getting up to an even better, more of their goals achieved, because if they're definitely a more left-leaning party compared to Fianna Fáil from Gael. So I suppose it's a moral thing. Yes, this gives them some of what they want, but would you be happy saying yes, knowing that it's actually not enough and it's not enough to stop climate change?
So it's to add to the point of what you're saying, it's kind of like they'd be establishing a precedent for, say, if other countries were looking to Ireland as an example, they'd be like, oh sure, Ireland are great, and they did this and it's still only not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't,
there's a lot of talk about this making us like a leader, like a leader in climate change. It's not. We won't be a leader in climate change. Like the new Danish deal is doing things 4 or 5 steps ahead of us. But we really think that this is pushing at the boat. But it's very good in lots of ways. There's lots of like 260 million a year for cycling pedestrian. That's amazing. Like that's exactly what we need.
Yeah.
But it's not really getting, like, there's nowhere that actually says that the government will stop the natural gas, the LNG in Shannon, the LNG. They say they won't get government funding. They don't say they're going to stop it. And things like that kind of wishy-washy stuff.
Yeah.
Can you trust Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? If you were the Greens, maybe not, and that's the worry. So
I think you do make valid points there. I think about perhaps the Greens having if they say no, that they can perhaps get maybe another 3 or 4 seats. But I think the issue with that is I don't think Sinn Féin are going to see any way of a rise to, like, they're not going to. I don't think the Sinn Féin are going to get 10 or 15 more seats when I think nearly pretty much every Sinn Féin candidate got voted in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, where are they going to get all, like, Sinn Féin? Where are they going? Where is Sinn Féin going to get all the candidates from? Is the question. So, I think moving forward, I think the Greens are in a position where they have a choice. You either take the risk, agree to the deal, and be firm on what you believe in. Get yourselves into the right ministerial roles and use your funds as efficiently as you possibly can. It has been proven after government that government funds are never used efficiently. If we take the Children's Hospital, for instance, originally it was funded at 400 million, now 1.2 billion, could be more. That's the biggest problem that you're going to have to get over. But climate change has to be acted on now, and has to be acted on 2 levels. From the government, and as a society, we need to wake up and understand what's happening. We need to change as well. We can't look towards the government to tell us what to do. We need to force the private market to change.
Yeah.
The private market at the minute is going to do what's profitable. If we decide that we no longer want to use plastic straws, let's use it at a very small level. If we decide that we no longer want to use plastic straws, we get rid of them. We don't ask for them with our meals. We ask for paper ones all the time. You will then see the private market react to that, because that's how markets work. They react to changes, to trends. A government coming in and putting in regulation is a fast way of doing it, but the government are very slow to do that because they don't want to have a bad knock-on effect on the economy, because of the main issue, which is that every single government has a mandate. They have to think about an election, so they can't be having huge unemployment rates, because that's bad for the next election. So if come back to the deal, so the Greens on the last time they were in government, they were stung pretty badly, as we were mentioning earlier. They were stung really badly, and that is a strong possibility that may happen again. But you have 4 years to really. You have an opportunity now. The first that I honestly did not believe was ever going to happen. In 2011, when the Green Party's only got 1 seat, I thought the party was pretty much dead. I thought that the Green Party really got on their knees to Fianna Fáil in the end, and really kind of let themselves down. And I kind of believed that the kind of Green Party had lost their soul. So what they're going to have to do now is, moving forward, and if they do accept this deal, is to be strong, stand strong, and really put forward their own agenda.
Yeah, so there's an argument to be made there, maybe in 3 years down the line, when climate change starts to intensify and maybe becomes like a really because at the moment I think it's this was like the 7th issue amongst voters, you know, public housing has a lot of these, like maybe in a few years when it starts to become really serious, people go, okay, it's the real issue. The fact that they're in government, they can start to enact even more, bring more things that even the more extreme members, you know, some of the more extreme, well I say extreme, but some of the more policies that would be even less in line with Fine Gael's views, start to bring them in. Maybe that'd be a good thing to be in government.
Because they'd be more socially acceptable, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Who knows?
It's hard stuff to say.
We like
as a member of the Green Party, I have to.
Yeah, we have to forget it.
I don't want to vote, but I pretend I did just to, you know, to be like as honest with myself as possible. And I really don't know. Yesterday, I was firmly yes, get into government. It's like things will change. Like, you got to get in. Like if you bring in the town stuff, the cycling stuff, like that'll get the ball rolling. Tuesday, like things might change, and then today I'm like, no, you can't really in good faith be like, yes, I accept this. This is good enough, and it's really ignoring some of the bigger issues at play in terms of, you know, inequality and that kind of thing. But it's also hard to know what kind of government would bring that kind of change. Like, unless it's one Richard Boyd Barrett is your new tea shop, it's very difficult to see a government that would bring about that change. But I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
And which way do you think that the party will vote? Have you seen some Zoom calls with hands up or anything like that?
It's extremely hard to say. I mean, first of all, fair play to the negotiators. Like, they did a really good job. Like, getting the 7% CO2 emissions was huge, and then the cycling and the street level, they did some massive things.
On the topic of the 7% rule, is there anything if they fail to achieve that? Because we've seen that in EU quotas and as on kind of the Paris agreement that there was an agreement, but if you don't get it, it's kind of, well, I'm sorry, guys, we didn't get it.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things to say initially is that they're saying on average a 7% reduction, which could mean that there's no reduction in the first year, but then just 14 in the second year. That, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then part of the things to do with that is actually, there's actually an interesting point that I highlighted that actually says something I didn't know was one of the main things I want to do is wind off the west coast of Ireland. It's a huge opportunity for Europe, but not just for Ireland. So they said the minimum amount of time it takes to design, find space for your wind farm, build it, is 5 years. Okay, so they're like, look, it's going to take 5 years to build it. Obviously, it's not going to have any benefits until the 5th year comes online, and then massive difference. So there's things like that. So they're like, well, the 7% in itself is not really a goal, you know, it's the 50% by 2030, that's the goal.
Yeah.
I suppose that's current, I don't think there's anything to stop them just disregarding that, except that's their whole party ethos. But one of the interesting things about projects like that, like the wind farm, is one of the projects they planned program is the Celtic Interconnector. Have you heard of this?
Between Brittany and Wexford or something.
Yeah, so they're going to have a massive it's like under the sea,
like
the Channel
submarine line.
Just like a line, for electricity, and basically electricity produced.
I have heard about that. Yeah.
And partly to do is that they want to build massive wind farms off the west coast, and then the Europe want to have access to this power, which is a really kind of interesting.
I think it's so we can sell our wind energy to France.
Yeah.
They can sell their nuclear energy to us when our wind isn't blowing. So it's like. I think the EU and they're having a whole
that's sort of an EU. It's interesting the fact that Engie, which are basically the French equivalent of like the ESB, are building things in Ireland. They're building a battery station in Carlow. They're building a few other things. So there's more of a pan-European kind of thing.
That should be great.
It would be great. No, definitely
super great.
Yeah, I mean renewable energies. If you need batteries, you need a way of storing energy. You need to have an interconnected grid. So I mean that's definitely a really good thing. But no, back to your original question, there is nothing stopping them, except I think that anyone who's in the Green Party at the very least understands the urgency of the situation. Yeah.
And I think getting the point across, I think to everyone, to that we do need to change, we need to accept that, and then also I think combating potentially once COVID finishes, that this, like, everyone will be talking about, okay, let's get the economy going again, let's get back going, and let's not try and get back to where we were, but let's get the GDP back up again, let's get all that pumping again. But that does have a social cost, and we were going to have to look at that and, you know, say that okay, we may have to accept, as a society, may have to accept slightly less, which is extremely difficult to say that, you know, instead of going on 2 holidays, you can only go on 1.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Trying to convince people of that is extremely difficult, but I think...
Who's going on 2 holidays a year?
But I think, you know, like, if that's what's going to have to be made, I think there's no other option, because...
I think that's one of the basically the grounds for the people who want to say no to this deal in the Green Party, is that for real climate change, real social change that would stop climate change, it's kind of incompatible with the current economic system. Like I said, asking people to accept a lower quality, like being say, oh no, you have to spend more on your food, you have to eat less meat, you can't go on holiday, you have to, like, it's definitely restrictive to say people you have to reduce your consumption. That's really, and it just doesn't agree with the current economic system. Your current economic system is that we need growth all the time, we need growth all the time. And that's the real thing, is that if you go into we're keeping the economy, and we're also just going to greenify it, that it's never going to work, and that's, I suppose, is the argument.
Yeah. But I think we're probably at a good time where, because COVID-19 has slowed down the economy so much, it's kind of an opportunity to while we're here, think of how we're doing stuff.
Yeah. Do we need to go back to doing things the way we did?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I would say no, but
like the one actually thing that we did not really talk about was transport. Was a 2-to-1 transport, which has been kind of talked about an awful lot, and I think it's something that, especially if we look at there was a picture went up online. Oh well, it's been in circulation for a while, but it showed the Irish rail network in 1920, and it showed it now, and the contrast is incredible.
I saw that they had some interesting lines they were saying. So they had this is called prioritise rail projects on existing and unused lines, but they had another interesting thing that I saw in the kind of program, that was they commissioned an economic evaluation of higher speed rail links between main cities. So like say what Japan has. Yeah. Which you know, they're making no promises there, but they're
they're making a promise.
Have a look at it, like, you know.
I guess another way that you can combat housing crisis is to make it easier and faster to get to commute. You know, like if you take Wexford for instance, there isn't a high speed, like it is quite slow to get there by train. There is nothing from Donegal. There isn't a
train line to Wexford, really.
Well, there is one, but it kind of goes along the coast, but it's slow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
there's no motorway either from Wexford directly to Dublin.
Yeah, Wexford is quite disconnected.
Yeah. So, you know, that's what we have to look at. I think getting more people, like that is another. Like the transport deal, the 2-for-1 deal is a huge thing that can have knock-on effects from like climate point of view. You know, getting on a Dublin bus and going from Houston station to UCD instead of getting a taxi. Like if you can fit 120 people onto a bus instead of taking 30 taxis, the knock-on effect of that is huge over a year. Do you know what I mean? So that is something that we have to look at as well.
Yeah.
I think one thing everyone should just look up at what Parisian mayor has done. She basically was just like, I'm building nodes, so I'm turning Paris into a cycling city. Like single-handedly, she's built like hundreds of miles, certainly planned for hundreds of miles of cycling lanes, and COVID has only accelerated that. Just Google it. It's unbelievable. It's rush hour. I'm saying this I'm doing air quotations. Rush hour in Paris, and it's completely silent. And the efficiency which people are passing on bikes. Again, you're there for 2 seconds and 20 people passing bikes. 20 cars would be stretching all the way down the street. You know the way they're trying. It's unbelievable. Cycling in the city should just be a no-brainer. Like
I mean, even if it's not the infrastructure in there, it's still better.
It's still better.
In Dublin now, like me and you would say.
Oh yeah. I'm just excited to go back to new cycling. I feel like it's so sad saying that. I actually can't wait. Like.
But if you take France for instance, they have a quite efficient underground with
as
the
well,
metro.
Yeah.
That in Dublin we don't really have. Like the Lewis is quite slow, and that is something that, like, realistically, if you were to have the ability to do, you would love to put the Lewis underground. And if you had something similar to a tube line where you could send it out to the airport. The airport is quite disconnected from the main city.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge market there.
I hope that in a couple of generations the Lewis is kind of like Oh, that was a really weird thing. Like, you know,
Yeah, that's
people
just
were like, "What the fuck was that?" Like the
Yeah,
Lewis,
it's above ground.
the
Wild.
Lewis.
Yeah, the Lewis. People got hit
And then
by
like
it.
now we have a proper metro.
Yeah.
Because it needs
Yeah.
it, like, you know, it's ridiculous.
I think to move on and to really become established as a city, I think you need something like that, especially like if you take a tourist, for instance, when they arrive into Dublin airport, the only thing they can actually see is either a bus or a taxi. There is
Yeah,
nothing else,
there's
and the
nothing
bus is quite inefficient, it's quite slow, and a taxi is quite expensive. But like if you were to walk out, if you take Heathrow, for instance, you walk out of Heathrow and there's a tube right there,
Yeah.
right into the city.
Portugal, like,
Portugal.
oh,
there's
so good.
trains, tubes everywhere. Like
And costs nothing. Like
Yeah.
literally euros.
Yeah.
yeah,
So I think it is only a matter, I think, of it's something that I think not all these the stuff that we've talked about, not all of them are going to be achieved, but I think certainly we can hope. But I think to the one or two people listening to this, we may actually
All our families and friends.
yeah, all the people that have just clicked here by accident or just played this and have fallen asleep. So
these guys are quite noisy.
yeah, it's just like we get picked up by Calm app or something.
Sleeping around or something.
End up in Al Jazeera or something. You know, I think the main thing we can take from this deal is that not only does the government have to change and become more modern and accept that we're not going to be perhaps as economically driven, but that we need to change as well, and it kind of takes some aspect, learn from the COVID experience, because I think there are obviously has been huge, like the pandemic has been hugely has had a huge impact on the world negatively. You know,
Yeah.
people have died, but I think for some people it has given them time to reflect on life and what the value of life is, and I think that we would hope in some aspects kind of be a good kind of foundation to move on. I think
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah, lovely.
lovely.
think
Well,
that's
we'll
it.
close there.
That's episode 1.